I just want to sort of follow up with some specific statistics that all kind of fold into the general theme that Monica presented. That is myths or misinformation that become significant barriers to better life-saving programming. And I want to talk about two specific aspects. First, public health, and then later I'll get to cat welfare. And when it comes to public health, there's kind of two aspects or two elements I want to talk about tonight. The first being rabies. And so some of you may have seen this quote from or have seen it repeated elsewhere in the media or something like that about cats being the #1 domesticated species, passing rabies infections to humans. This is from the 2016 book, Cat Wars. And again, there's a cause hypothesized here, right? The presence of all these stray, unvaccinated, free roaming cats. And then something in last year in Florida Today actually went further. Instead of trying to make the connection between just free roaming cats and rabies cases, they actually went further and suggested that it's actually TNR and return to field programs that are responsible for this. And you can imagine, you see these sorts of stories in the media, this is a significant barrier. The public who then contact the city council, it makes it very hard to do these sorts of programs. In fact, when you dig into it, you can go back to 1975, look at data from the CDC, and what you find is over that time period, cats were responsible for exactly 1 case of rabies in humans. And you can see here, the unknowns often are wildlife, but if it's a bat bite, it's often hard to determine. So it's assumed that a lot of those are bat bites. You can see wildlife. Most of the dogs shown on here are actually, the bite occurred outside the country, and these are servicemen and women who are again, overseas as part of their military service, and then are treated at home. So they get tracked by CDC, but it didn't occur here. What I find most interesting here are the transplants. So these are organ transplants and transfusions. And like, have you ever heard that these account for 7 times the number of rabies cases in humans in the US as compared to cats, right? That's the reality here. And in fact, you would have to go back to 1960 to find the next most recent example of a cat transferring rabies, the rabies virus, to a human. And in fact, that happened when this woman was vacationing in Guatemala. She came home before she was treated. So, you know, that even that did not happen in this country. So again, untangling all these, there's just not a lot of evidence to support those claims, but because it's scary, it gets a ton of traction in the media. It's also worth asking the question, even if we're really, really concerned about cats transmitting rabies to humans, why on earth would you restrict or prohibit TNR or TNVR? I wasn't entirely consistent in the presentation. I sometimes included the V for vaccination, sometimes not. Obviously, we want to vaccinate it. We've heard a lot in the last several weeks about herd immunity. And this little illustration shows what that could look like if 50% of a particular herd of cats were vaccinated against rabies. And you see at the bottom, you've got 8 cats and 1 of them is infected versus all the others. Now, what happens if you remove, right, traditional, as Monica was just talking about, if you remove 2 of those cats, and those are the orange circles here, now look at the scenario you get when you get to the 3rd disease generation, the bottom of that pyramid, right? Whole lot more cats infected than you had in the first scenario. So obviously this is something we want to promote, is more vaccination. The second public health item I want to talk about tonight, we probably have all heard about toxoplasmosis, which is caused by the Toxoplasma gondii parasite. And if you've heard about it, it's probably been with one of these sensationalist headlines. This was from several years ago in the Atlantic. I think most of us on this call can agree our cat might be making us crazy, but it's nothing to do with toxo. Mental health problems, again, you know, okay, maybe there are mental health problems, probably have nothing to do with the cats. This is one of my favorites. This is from I don't know if it's Live Science or Live Science. I think it's Live Science from a very popular website. And this was in 2011. Again, really scary headline, right? Mind controlling parasite, increased brain cancer. This sounds pretty scary. The following year, on the same website, good news, your cat won't give you brain cancer. You want to guess which of these got a whole lot more media attention and Facebook shares? Of course, it was the first one because it's the scarier one, right? That's just kind of how these things work. I won't go into a lot of detail right here. As I mentioned previously, if any, I will put up at the end of the presentation, by the way, I'll put up my email address. Anyone looking for any of these studies that are cited, feel free, please, please, please email me and I'll send you all the details here. But the larger point is when you start drilling into these studies, the really large studies find that there really aren't the kind of causal relationships that are often suggested in these headlines. We've all heard the expression correlation is not the same as causation. And that applies with most all of these studies. You might see what appears to be a relationship there, but again, you get into the larger studies, the ones that are done in more detail, and you find out that there's very little evidence to support those scary headlines that we see so often. It's also true that the infection rate in this country has declined significantly over the last several years. I haven't looked at the most recent data yet, but would expect that it continues to decline a little bit. Again, you don't see this in the headlines, right? It's not a very exciting headline to say that there's less of this. It's also true, and this is really interesting, this is from a study done by some folks at UC Davis. And what they found was that managed feral cats, and that's what they call them, these were cats they obtained from a shelter. Okay, these were shelter intake cats, much less likely to be infected with this parasite than what they called unmanaged feral cats. And these came from wildlife areas. So these are the cats who were really surviving on their own. That the shorter bar, the first one, those are cats who were relying on humans for their sustenance. So there's a lot to be said for actually managing these colonies like most of us do if we actually want to reduce the risk caused by this parasite. And again, I want to shift a little bit to animal welfare concerns. These are maybe more than the public health concerns. These we often, as Monica said, like this is the kind of stuff that we might share on social media or something like that, well-intentioned, but can be really, really harmful. This is a quote, we've probably all seen similar quotes. This one's actually from PETA talking about all the risks that are faced by outdoor cats. We know there's risks that outdoor cats face. I don't let my cats go outside for that very reason. But to suggest that because of those risks, we're supposed to round them all up and bring them to the shelter for a one-way trip, that's a whole other conversation. Another quote here, again, basically the same theme, right? All the risks outside. And so again, what's implied, if not stated directly, is these cats needed to be rounded up, taken to the shelter, and not come home. Another quote from Cat Wars about the short lives that cats live. Then when you talk to somebody who works in a shelter, or did, he no longer does, John Cicerelli up at San Jose, right? All these previous quotes, these are from folks who are not familiar with the situation that so many of us on the call are familiar with. And again, he talks about most of the cats being healthy, they're vibrant. What they need from us is sterilization and vaccination. They don't need to be rounded up. And when you start looking at the data, it supports that. This again is from San Jose. And these are cats brought in DOA, dead on arrival. Typically that means hit by car. And what you see is after San Jose started doing their enormous return to field program, things got better for cats, right? The thinking is the males in particular were roaming less and less likely to get hit by a car. And so that explains, again, this significance, like a 20% decrease in DOA shelter intake, which is enormous. This is from a Julie Levy study from 2014. And you can see here, 2,366 cats total. And this shows how many, relatively speaking, how many were in really rough shape, so rough that they needed legitimately to be euthanized upon intake. And that's that tiny little sliver at the top. The vast majority healthy. They could be returned, they could be transferred to rescue, they could be adopted. Another, in this case, it's a larger sample, almost 73,000 cats. But again, the same trend, right? Vast majority are returned, a smaller fraction are adopted or transferred. How many are really, really in rough shape? Half of 1%. So, and this really speaks to, Monica touched on this, the idea of returning friendlies, right? And everything she said is true. Someone's going to miss those guys if they're not returned. They're social for a reason because they have their people, often many people in the same community. And if that concern comes from a concern for their welfare, I worry about these guys outside. We know the vast, vast majority of these guys are doing really, really well outside. And then just last, I want to touch on FIV and FELV, sorry. Again, this is, comes from a good place. We're concerned about their welfare. When they've actually done studies and looked at this, the rates among these cats, and again, it's helpful to be sterilized, because for FELV, the most common transmission route is moms to kittens. For FIV, it's deep bites from males fighting as part of competing for mates. So sterilizing, everything gets better in terms of FIV and FELV. And so in summary, just 3 points really. Unlike what you might see in the news media, TNVR or TNR protects and promotes public health. The vast majority of these cats are healthy, and these programs can improve community cat welfare. They're in no way a threat to the welfare of the cats we care so much about. And again, you can feel free to email me. I'm happy to share any of these studies or continue the conversation by way of email. I would also, one final pitch for the Feline Research Council. In a lot of these issues that come up, whether it's about the public health issues, again, rabies or whatever, whether it's cat welfare, a lot of this stuff is addressed on the National Feline Research Council website. So I encourage folks to check that out. And again, I'm part of that effort, so feel free to email me if you have any suggestions, or you think maybe there's something missing from that site, or you have any feedback. Please feel free to let me know.